former central banker, later travelled to London to meet Canada's head of state, King Charles, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. James Bazina has more.
It's a quick visit, but jam-packed to strengthen Canada's ties with two of its closest allies, France and the United Kingdom.
And Canada's new Prime Minister Mark Carney used his first official overseas trip to meet with the leaders of Britain and France, seeking support from old allies as relations with the U.S. sour.
Canada, a country of North American size and wealth, long known as the U.S.'s closest friend, trading partner and strategic ally. It also has one of the world's largest energy resources, a huge supply base from oil to natural gas, minerals to forest products. While some in the country may say we are tied to the United States, the new government recently formed under the leadership of Mark Carney has made it clear that things will not go back to the way they were before. The Trump tariffs imposed by Washington have provoked strong reactions in Canada, and the Ottawa administration has accelerated its search for alternative partners. Against this backdrop, Canada's new Prime Minister Mark Carney made his first international trip to France and the UK. This is quite normal given Canada's demographic and cultural composition. But it is not that simple. As such, the diplomacy with both Paris and London has led to the headlines Canada has chosen its side, gracing the world press.
Tonight, Mark Carney takes his first trip abroad as Prime Minister, as his cabinet works to cut Canada's reliance on the U.S.
So, what is the meaning of Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's first foreign trip to Paris and London? Mark Carney, formerly Governor of the Bank of Canada and then Governor of the Bank of England, is a well-respected figure in global financial circles. Specializing in economic crisis management, Carney became Prime Minister in early 2025 with a surprise electoral success. While some expected him to adopt a technocratic approach to statecraft, he instead embarked on a much more ambitious diplomatic path. Promising to reform Canada's foreign policy, he signaled that he would manage tensions with the United States as a chess game. The fact that Carney's first foreign visit was to Paris and London instead of Washington was widely reported in the world press. The news in the global press was given with the headlines, "Canadian Prime Minister skips traditional US visit." Carney, who held meetings with French President Macron and British Prime Minister, gave the message of alternative friendships in a multipolar world, reinforcing the idea that bilateral relations will no longer be the same, while not closing the door to the US completely. So why Paris and London? Carney made both economic and strategic contacts in Paris and London. On the economic front, he emphasized that he would not turn his back on the EU and Europe's leading capitals, but wanted to diversify the Canadian economy. Thus, he met the expectations of the Canadian domestic public opinion, which has long criticized the dependence on the US market. Moreover, in London, Carney reunited with his former colleagues at the Bank of England and reached preliminary agreements to deepen financial partnerships. The talks in Paris, on the other hand, were more diplomatic and strategic. French President Emmanuel Macron suggested that joint working groups could be set up with Canada on defense and technology cooperation. This is a development that could shake the traditional picture within NATO. Ottawa is now leaving the door open to partnerships in military technology projects, not only with Washington but also with European states. "We are not going to make the future of our defense industry dependent on a single country," Mark Carney said, confirming that Ottawa is seeking to create an alternative to US-based projects. In this process, topics such as the F-35 deal and a possible kill switch scandal have moved to the top of the agenda. However, Canada's concerns are not limited to defense technology. New tariffs in the agriculture, automotive and energy sectors and the increasingly protectionist policies of the US are forcing Ottawa to find other friends. The resulting picture points to perhaps one of the biggest tests of US-Canada relations in the last half-century. While Mark Carney's government welcomes Europe with open arms, telling the domestic public that we must protect our security concerns and economic interests, Washington is planning retaliatory moves against what it sees as a betrayal. So, how did this grand chess match between the two countries begin? Where might it evolve, and how might it affect the world? Carney stands out as a leader known for his economist and central bank background, and an expert in turning crisis into opportunity. Since the day he took office as Prime Minister, he has frequently stated that the US has been highly strained by the tariffs and different diplomatic moves imposed by the Trump school, and that his country now has to draw an alternative route. The contacts he established in Europe during his visits to Paris and London have strengthened the question, is Canada breaking away from Washington? Within the country, those in favor of freedom from US pressure are very supportive of this new policy. Carney is remembered for saying, while there are risks in the short term, we will not give in to unilateral impositions. But it would be misleading to think that the tensions are limited to the trade dimension. Rumors of the cancellation of Canada's long-standing F-35 fighter jet project with the US have created a new dynamic of conflict between Ottawa and Washington. While the Carney government has spoken of reviewing the $13 billion F-35 purchase, this gesture represents a major jolt for the United States. This aircraft, developed over the years with NATO allies and close partners, is one of the pillars of the Pentagon's vision of common defense. Now, the possibility of Canada cancelling this project, which has also been shaken by the kill switch allegations, has caused alarm bells to literally ring in Washington. The kill switch rumors suggested that the US could disable critical parts of the F-35 through software, a feature that foreign buyers had to accept. In Canada, there has been a concern for some time that if we have a multi-billion-dollar project, who is really in control of these planes? The new government listed these concerns under the heading of security, because the claim that the United States can take Canadian F-35s out of service if it so chooses, either in combat or in the event of a diplomatic crisis, reinforces Ottawa's argument that we must have a say in our national defense. This kill-switch debate has lent legitimacy to the Carney team's "let's strengthen our own defense industry and not be dependent on the US rhetoric." On the other side, the additional tariffs imposed by the US after Trump's re-election seem to be targeting the lifeblood of the Canadian economy. With moves in the automotive parts, agricultural products, and energy sectors, Washington cites protective policies. But Ottawa calls it outright coercion. The Canadian people do not have to accept this imposition, Carney said, accelerating plans to expand into European and Asian markets. Carney's European meetings with French President Macron and the British Prime Minister were noteworthy. Ottawa sources cite preliminary agreements on energy and defense cooperation. While the possibility of Canada cancelling the F-35 fighter jet project is being discussed, it is claimed that behind this cancellation are plans to turn to the next-generation defense platforms coming from Europe. It has also been suggested that Carney has been in secret contacts with German and French defense giants for these projects. These visits also send the message that Canada is not completely closing the door to the US, but Washington will not be the only option. These are all signs that could escalate tensions between the two neighbors. Carney and French President Emmanuel Macron did not take questions from journalists, and a joint press conference with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer was not scheduled. An official familiar with the matter, who spoke on condition of anonymity because he was not authorized to speak publicly, said the Canadians offered a press conference in Paris, but the French declined. Starmer described Canada as a friend and ally of the UK, but refused to directly address Trump's rhetoric on annexation, although he went further than he had done before, emphasizing Canada's sovereignty. The relationship between our countries has always been strong, Starmer told Carney at the British leader's residence at 10 Downing St. E. Two sovereign allies, so much in common, a shared history, shared values, a shared king. Carney rejected the idea that he was seeking the support of other countries to affirm Canada as a nation. "We don't need another country to affirm our sovereignty. We are sovereign," he said. "We can defend ourselves. Disrespect is not helping, and it needs to stop before we sit down about a broader partnership." Macron did not comment ahead of the meeting on Trump's attacks on Canada, but said tariffs only lead to inflation and damage supply chains. "In the current international context, we want to be able to develop our most strategic projects with our closest, most loyal partners," Macron said. In London, Carney was greeted by Canada's head of state, King Charles III, at Buckingham Palace before his talks with Starmer. Wearing a red tie and Order of Canada lapel pin, the monarch congratulated Carney on his recent victory. He was sworn in on Friday. "Canada is fortunate to have a determined defender of our sovereign state," Carney wrote on his social media account. Carney will travel to Canada's Arctic coast on Tuesday to reaffirm the country's security and sovereignty. Trump's tariffs have been the most important catalyst for Ottawa's challenge to the United States. Tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum exports, burdens on the automotive sector, and quotas on agricultural products were perceived as an insult by the Carney team. For decades, Canada had been a stabilizing supplier to the US economy. Oil and natural gas, minerals, forest products, even technological components. All of them flowed from north to south, feeding American industry, supplying refineries with raw materials, and filling market shelves. Now, Trump's tough policies have been enacted with a protectionist approach that says, we're going to put Canada in a corner. Carney said this was unacceptable. Then we will look for alternatives to the US market, Ottawa quickly responded. Ideas such as shifting energy exports to Europe, new trade agreements with the EU and the UK, and selling petrochemical products to Asia began to materialize. This was enough to justify the headline, Canada has chosen its side. A determination not to remain tied to the US on the continent, but to expand into other oceans. In addition to energy and trade, we will strengthen our independence in defense policy, Carney said, surprising the US in another area. For years, Canada has been participating in joint defense projects with the US, most notably investing heavily in the F-35 fighter jet program. Recently, however, the question, does the F-35 have a kill switch or not, has been hotly debated in Ottawa. Allegedly, the United States could keep a critical software switch in these high-tech aircraft it sells to allies, disabling the aircraft's function at any time. This rumor led the Canadian Defence Ministry to wonder, if we are pouring billions into this project, why should we continue if we cannot be the real masters of the planes? It was at this point that the Carney government said, we don't want to move forward on such a critical project with a United States that doesn't take our security concerns seriously. Even though the US side said absolutely nothing like that, Canadian officials put the possibility of cancelling the F-35 deal on the table in the absence of a clear denial or technical guarantees. This was literally a red alert for the United States. If NATO and close allies were to break away from the F-35 project, it could shake the US's defense industry leadership. As tensions over the F-35 grew, Trump tariffs continued to anger Canada. Tariffs on steel and aluminum made Canadian exports to the US unprofitable. Trump's policies, which also imposed additional obligations on auto parts, put Canadian automotive giants in a difficult position. On agriculture, Ottawa responded to the US claim that Canada is being protectionist by saying, your farmers already receive too many subsidies. You are the unfair competition. These mutual accusations have strained Canada-US relations, which have been calm for many years. Agriculture, automotive, energy. We are open to negotiations on all of them, but we will not give in to unilateral pressure, Mark Carney said. We will sit at the table with Europe. We will increase our trade with Asia, and if the US doesn't do what the US says, we will do this, he said, causing panic in the US. Another topic causing panic is Canada's strategic security concerns. While new trade routes were on the agenda due to melting ice caps in the Arctic, the US was seeking to expand its influence there with the international waters approach. Canada, on the other hand, began to push back, saying, this is our sovereign territory. We cannot accept US impositions. For a long time, Ottawa had been voicing concerns that the US is coveting our northern territories. Now the Trump team's behavior has raised those concerns to the level of security concerns. When the allegations of kill switch in the F-35 or other defense projects were added, the feeling spread. We will spend all this money, but at the most critical moment, the US will come and turn off the lock. Is this going to happen? While this sentiment fueled Canada's demand for defense independence, the idea of buying fighter jets or other systems from Europe was perceived as the logical option. Europe's arms are open to these Canadian pursuits. The EU needs reliable partners in North America, French President Macron said when he met Mark Carney in Paris, signaling support for Canada. The UK is a geography that Carney knows well as the former governor of the Bank of England. London, in search of global partnerships after Brexit, seems ready to jump into new trade and defense agreements with Canada. In this way, Canada will be able to diversify its economy outside the US and turn to European technologies to alleviate the fear of kill switch in defense. The US, on the other hand, is panicking. As if tensions with Mexico and China were not enough, is Canada now turning its back on Europe? The Trump administration may read this as, we need to bring Canada into line. New retaliatory tariffs, additional import restrictions, or logistical barriers to Canada could be on the agenda. But Ottawa says, we will retaliate even harder. A trade war between the two sides could damage both economies. There could be supply chain disruptions, especially in areas such as energy and automotive parts, where the US depends on Canadian suppliers. Canadian companies could also struggle by losing the US market. But Carney invites Washington to an unpredictable negotiation by asking, can both sides afford to hurt themselves? On the other hand, Canadian opposition politicians said, Carney is taking a big gamble. Taking the US to this extent will put the economy into recession in the short term, warns the opposition politicians. However, opinion polls show that a significant part of the public is of the opinion that let's not give in to the US impositions any longer. In particular, the recent tariff increases by the US have strengthened the feeling among Canadians that we have had enough. Carney, on the other hand, says he can manage the crisis thanks to his central bank experience, and that opening up to European and Asian markets will strengthen Canada in the long run. He's developed a slogan-like rhetoric, emphasizing the themes of sovereignty, security, and economic diversity. The F-35 crisis occupies a special place in this picture, because this project was considered not only a defense tool but also a symbol of the US alliance. When a major partner like Canada pulls out for fear of a kill switch, it casts a shadow over all US allies, which means we can also disable you. This could undermine trust within NATO. Some European countries might start asking, are we running the same risk? In such a scenario, Washington argues that the F-35 is a cement designed to cement the Western alliance, and Canada's cancellation would crack that cement considerably. Carney's statement that they are imposing an aircraft on us that we have no control over could revive European projects to challenge the US defense monopoly. If Canada joins France and Germany in their joint fighter jet efforts, perhaps the F-35 monopoly will begin to be broken. As the rhetoric of "we are not your only option" is frequently heard between the parties, the diplomatic table is also hardening. The US could threaten, if you cancel the project, you will pay billions of dollars in compensation. Canada could respond, you are already hurting us with tariffs, so we will take that compensation as well. In the background, issues such as Arctic sovereignty are also fueling Ottawa's security sensitivities. The thought that the US has its eyes on there too, maybe a kill switch could come into play not only in the F-35, but in all defense cooperation, pushes the Carney administration to take radical steps. As a result, the themes of kill switch, Trump tariffs, and European partnership combine to create scenarios of rupture. The global dimension is also important. If the US, which is engaged in a trade war with Mexico and China, pushes Canada to the front line against itself, there may be a shake-up of confidence both in the American stock market and in the international market. The news was already talking about a loss of $1.7 trillion in the stock market. Investors might say, if the US and Canada are pitted against each other, this trade war will get bigger, let's save our money, and sell their shares. So the volatility in the American markets could deepen. The relationship, which was not strained this much even under Trudeau, is being taken to a completely different dimension with Carney's radical attitude. Finally, the biggest development that underlines the statement Canada has chosen its side is Canada's determination to open up to Europe. In Paris and London, it is rumoured that there are preparations for new agreements in the fields of automotive and energy. In the post-Brexit period, the UK wants to quickly conclude trade agreements with Canada. France is discussing joint projects with Canada in defense technology and cybersecurity. The EU is planning to increase its LNG purchases from Canada as it wants to reduce its energy dependence on Russia. In this picture, a new bridge is being built between the American continent and Europe through Canada. But this bridge does not lead to Washington, but to Brussels and London. This begs the question, will the traditional friendship between the US and Canada be replaced by a Canada-Europe friendship? The Carney government seems to be squeezing the US by skillfully using the cards of retaliatory tariffs and turning to European and Asian markets. The US reaction remains to be seen. Will it toughen tariffs even further or make concessions at the diplomatic table? Will the tug-of-war over the Arctic and defense bring things to a breaking point? Or will the big boys somehow compromise and find a middle ground? What do you think? Is Canada emerging from the decades-long shadow of US sovereignty and forging a new path with Europe and Asia, or is Carney just trying to strengthen his hand in the bargain? Will the alleged kill switch of the F-35 project really open the door to a revolution in Canadian defense policy? Will the trade dispute that began with the Trump tariffs lead to a permanent rift in North America? Or will a compromise eventually be reached? Don't forget to share your views. We will keep you updated as new developments unfold. If you subscribe to our channel and leave a like, you will be the first to know about the analysis we will publish in the coming days. Stay tuned.